his life, Stravinsky's music continuously shocked, provoked, and enthralled audiences around the world, reinventing music's potential with every note. In this video, we'll be diving into Stravinsky's life, exploring his diverse musical styles, from his Russian primitivism to his neoclassicism, all the way to his serialism and beyond. We're going to dive deep into one of the most significant composers of the 20th century, and I'm going to show you what made Stravinsky revolutionary. Igor Stravinsky was born in 1882 in Oranienbaum, a seaside town near St. Petersburg, Russia. The son of a renowned opera singer, Stravinsky grew up surrounded by music, but his parents initially hoped he would follow a more conventional path, encouraging him to study law at the University of St. Petersburg. But of course, that's not quite what happened. While he did study law, he became friends with Vladimir Rimsky-Korsakov, son of the famous composer Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov. Vladimir introduced Stravinsky to his father, and Stravinsky soon started taking private lessons from the great composer, who quickly recognized Stravinsky's potential and nurtured it. Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov would become Stravinsky's most significant mentor and influence in his early life, not just teaching him the rules of music, but encouraging him to push against them. Rimsky-Korsakov was a crucial influence on Stravinsky's early career, and he guided Stravinsky's musical development. However, Stravinsky's later styles would break away from Rimsky-Korsakov and establish him as a unique and pioneering voice in the music world. Stravinsky began truly making his mark in the early 1900s. His big breakthrough came from a relationship with Sergei Diaghilev, the founder of the avant-garde Ballet Russe in Paris. The Ballet Russe were huge at the time, largely because of the great dancer Vaslav Nijinsky. One could argue that Nijinsky was the real draw and artistic inspiration for all of these ballets. And indeed, ballet played a huge part in all of Stravinsky's life. Many of his most well-loved pieces were written as ballets, even if they are now performed primarily as concert works. He even went on to marry a ballet dancer later in life. So, Stravinsky's first major work with Diaghilev was The Firebird, which premiered in 1910, a ballet based on a fabulous Russian fairy tale story about a magical glowing bird with invaluable feathers. The Firebird showcased Stravinsky's skill at incorporating traditional music into novel and imaginative forms. Two elements in this piece were surely nurtured by his mentor Rimsky-Korsakov. These are the usage of Russian folk songs and the creation of wonderful, fantastical soundscapes. Take for instance the sunrise from Firebird, which is almost cinematic in portraying a fantastic landscape, and it sounds very Korsakovian. Or take the final tableau, which uses a Russian folk song, The Pine Tree Swings by the Gate, one that Rimsky-Korsakov had actually used before. But Stravinsky turns this into something magnificent. Diaghilev, the choreographer of this ballet, had famously said, "Étonne-moi," astonish me, and I think with their first collaboration, Stravinsky did just that. Its success made him an overnight sensation in the world of music. Riding on this success, Stravinsky created Petrushka in 1911, a ballet that tells a story of love and jealousy among three puppets, a sort of Russian Punch and Judy, if you like. Stravinsky further explored Russian folklore and brought an entirely original rhythmic vitality and harmonic ingenuity to this score. The score is brilliant and vivid, it's hugely accessible, and yet it presents innovations that would mark the path of what was to come. For example, listen to this wonderfully opulent Russian dance. And then compare that with the more shocking second tableau. We hear the Petrushka chord, a C major and F sharp major chord on top of one another. Stravinsky uses this harmony often, sometimes to play music in two keys at once, or to explore the potential of the octatonic scale. But the work that truly shattered expectations and marked Stravinsky as a total revolutionary was The Rite of Spring, which premiered in 1913. Its avant-garde music and unconventional choreography depicting rituals celebrating the arrival of spring famously incited a riot at its first performance in Paris, though there are many conflicting accounts of just how momentous this uproar actually was. The harsh dissonances, unpredictable rhythms, and the raw, primal energy of The Rite of Spring were unlike anything audiences had ever heard before. These early works marked Stravinsky as a daring innovator, a reputation he would continue to build upon in the years to come. So let's take a closer look at what made Stravinsky's music of this period so special. Stravinsky's Russian period, from roughly 1907 to 1919, is characterized by powerful works steeped in Russian folklore and vibrant, imaginative orchestration. This is where we encounter several of his most influential pieces, including The Rite of Spring, one of my favorite examples of musical primitivism. Primitivism as a cultural and artistic movement sought to embrace the raw, instinctual, and elemental aspects of art. In Stravinsky's case, he utilized this concept to bring forth an almost primal energy in his compositions, often through the use of pulsating rhythms, raw dissonances, and unusual, often shocking musical choices. The Rite of Spring is notable for its percussive use of dissonance, its complex layering of rhythms, and its stark, jarring musical contrasts. It abandons traditional tonalities, instead using a wide palette of atonal and polytonal passages. Take this famous passage, which aggressively overlays an E major with an E flat major 7th chord at the same time, all while inserting seemingly random rhythmic stabs. Or take this moment of wild, unpredictable rhythm. Have you ever tried to count this moment? Or what about this moment of intense musical madness with its thrilling trombone glissandi? Stravinsky makes you almost feel the experience, evoking this 1,000-year-old, ritualistic, wild, orgiastic dance where a virgin is sacrificed to the earth in a rite of fertility, using dissonant harmonies and unpredictable rhythms to create this feeling of primal, pagan wildness. All of these elements combined to challenge and revolutionize musical expectations. Audiences were shocked, sometimes to the point of outrage. Yet, this work compelled listeners to rethink what music could be. This piece transformed the way composers used rhythm, harmony, and orchestration, paving the way for the radical musical changes of the 20th century. Yet, I think what people love about this is that even within its modernism, there are tunes to be found, and more than that, it tells a story, both musically and programmatically. As such, it's a very accessible piece. Perhaps it's accessible even because of its wild rhythms and dissonances. Another of my favorite pieces of Russian primitivism is Les Noces, which translates as The Wedding. This ballet depicts the preparations for a traditional Russian wedding, where the bridesmaids help prepare the bride's hair, the groom asks for a blessing, the mothers lament that their children are leaving, and there's a wedding feast. In dazzling originality, Stravinsky scores this for a timpani, a wide array of percussion, 4 pianos, a mixed chorus, and soloists. So basically, it's just pure percussive instruments and vocals, the first musical instruments ever to exist. And this was music for a ballet. I adore this recording by Theodor Korentzis, where the vocalists actually sound like a group of Russian folk, rather than polite classical singers. That's something that so many recordings get wrong. But this recording immerses you in this idea that Stravinsky was really trying to capture, or rather reinvent, this connection with ancient Russian roots. That's what Russian primitivism was all about. The First World War consumed much of the world between 1914 and 1918, and the Russian Revolution changed the face of Stravinsky's home country in 1917. Stravinsky, like many artists and intellectuals of his time, chose exile over the uncertain future of his homeland. He spent most of the war in Switzerland before moving to France and then finally to the United States some years later. For you keen students of music, Stravinsky actually delivered 6 Charles Eliot Norton lectures at Harvard, which have been transcribed into a book called Poetics of Music in the form of 6 lessons. Although Stravinsky moved country, he continued his fruitful collaboration with Sergei Diaghilev and the Ballet Russe, producing Les Noces and Pulcinella. However, he also began to form new creative alliances. Notably, his friendships with key figures such as Pablo Picasso and George Balanchine helped expand his creative horizons. Stravinsky's friendship with Picasso, who had also worked with the Ballet Russe, inspired him to experiment with form and structure in his music. Stravinsky actually wrote a 5-bar sketch of clarinet music for Picasso on a hotel telegram, attempting to capture Picasso's cubism style. He used complex rhythms and turned the telegram on its side so that the horizontal lines became vertical. Picasso, in turn, drew Stravinsky. This drawing was actually mistaken for a secret military plan by guards at the Swiss border and nearly confiscated. They even collaborated musically. Stravinsky wrote Ragtime, and Picasso drew the cover art in one continuous line of pencil movement. Meanwhile, Stravinsky's collaborations with Balanchine, one of the 20th century's great choreographers, led to more successful ballets, including Apollo, Orpheus, and later Agon. Their shared Russian roots and their love for reinventing tradition resulted in works that pushed the boundaries of both music and dance. During the 1920s and 30s, Stravinsky underwent a significant stylistic shift, moving away from the primitivism of his early ballets. This phase was his Neoclassical period. Extending until the mid-1950s, this phase saw Stravinsky looking to the past to draw inspiration from historical musical forms and conventions, even as he put his own unique modern twist on them. Some critics consider this movement in art a somewhat ironical one, a cynical post-war response to the unbounded optimism of pre-war music. So let's look at some of these neoclassical works. Pulcinella premiered in 1920, and it stands as a landmark in Stravinsky's neoclassical oeuvre. For this ballet, Stravinsky was asked to arrange music believed to have been written by 18th century Italian composer Giovanni Pergolesi. In fact, if you were to listen to the beginning, you'd be forgiven for thinking it was a Renaissance work by Handel or the likes. It's only later that the quirkiness and originality of Stravinsky comes out. Stravinsky used the ancient material as a springboard for his own creative interpretation. He maintained the basic melodic lines, but embedded them within a distinctly 20th century musical language, including his own characteristic orchestration. Another shining example of Stravinsky's neoclassical period is the opera The Rake's Progress, inspired by the paintings of Hogarth. In this work, Stravinsky employed a range of historical forms, such as arias, duets, and ensembles that recall Mozart and other classical composers. You can hear moments of pure recitative.
You are too generous, sir. You must not think me ungrateful.
Or an aria, which is a bizarre blend of Stravinsky and Mozartisms, Stramozart perhaps. Yet his harmonic language, though more conventional than his earlier works, retains his unmistakable stamp, full of unexpected turns and dissonances. Rather than simple pastiche, Stravinsky's approach involved extracting the essence of earlier styles and refracting them through his own musical prism. His unique talent was in his ability to reinterpret the old in a way that it became unmistakably his. Other works worth exploring in this period are Stravinsky's symphonies, his Symphony in C, his Symphony in 3 movements, and his Symphony of Psalms are all remarkably strong works which blend his neoclassicism with his advanced and exciting rhythms, harmonies, and orchestrations. Stravinsky's neoclassical period was more than a mere retreat to past styles. It was a creative reinterpretation, a dialogue between past and present that broadened the scope of 20th century music. Through works like these, Stravinsky demonstrated that he was as much a master of reinvention as he was a revolutionary. Stravinsky's creative journey took another turn in the 1950s when he began exploring serialism, a method of composition that uses a series of musical notes in a fixed pattern, a technique that had been developed and prominently used by composers such as Arnold Schoenberg. This was a marked departure from his earlier work, causing controversy among both his supporters and his critics. The crux of serialism lies in its structured approach towards pitch. In a 12-tone serial piece, all 12 pitches of the chromatic scale are used equally, often organized into a tone row, which serves as the foundational musical material for the work. These rows can be transposed, inverted, or retrograded to produce variations. In Agon, Stravinsky integrates serialism with his own signature style, resulting in a ballet that's both structurally rigorous and yet wildly imaginative. Composed for 12 dances, that's Stravinsky playing with the idea of 12-tone, Agon is a reflection of the 12-tone technique, though Stravinsky's application is more flexible than orthodox serialism. The ballet is filled with contrasts. Ancient dance forms meet modern ones, and the serial patterns are frequently juxtaposed with slightly more cantabile or even dance-like passages. Stravinsky's forays into serialism were controversial. Many wondered why he, the revolutionary behind the thrilling wildness of the Rite of Spring, would adopt this rather square, almost mathematical or academic technique that had been in use since the early 20th century. They found the strictures of serialism at odds with Stravinsky's typically vibrant and eclectic style. However, others might argue that Stravinsky was not a composer constrained by serialism, but rather one invigorated by it, using its principles as a springboard for fresh exploration. One could argue that these later serialist works reflect his ceaseless curiosity and his enduring desire to innovate. Through all these phases of his life and career, Stravinsky proved himself a true chameleon of music, continuously evolving, ever pioneering, leaving an indelible mark on every genre he touched. In the final chapter of his life, Stravinsky faced numerous health issues, but his passion for music remained undimmed. He continued to compose, perform, and conduct well into his 80s. His last major work was his Requiem Canticles, a compact but profound piece that some interpret as a reflection on mortality. After a brief return to the public eye with a series of concerts, his health rapidly declined. On April 6, 1971, at the age of 88, Igor Stravinsky passed away in his Manhattan apartment. He left behind a rich legacy, not just in his prolific body of work, but in the countless composers and musicians he inspired. Today, Stravinsky is remembered as a titan of 20th century music, a revolutionary artist who forever altered the course of musical history.